Lost Art with Andrew Cox, retired Master Gunnery Sergeant. thelostart.podbean.com. Get some merchandise and help support the podcast in getting our veteran voices out for all to hear. Now on all major podcast platforms. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Be a guest, tell your veteran story, discuss your veteran business or organization. Email The Lost Art with Andrew Cox at gmail.com. Andrew Cox, a Till Valhalla Project Ambassador. See the project story at tillvalhallaproject.com. Thanks for tuning in. Please enjoy the podcast that's giving a voice to our veterans. The Lost Art with Andrew Cox.
Yeah. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Lost Art Podcast, that podcast giving a voice to our veterans. I'm your host, Andrew Cox, and today we're having a My Veteran Story. But before we get into the episode, you join the podcast and go to the Lost Art website. That's thelostart.podbean.com. Go check it out, see what we're all about. Don't forget there is that merchandise tab. You can click on that merchandise tab. You can go get you some cool gear, get a hat, get a shirt, get a cup, get you something like that and help support us in getting our veteran voices out for all to hear. Also, a big shout out to the Till Valhalla Project, and I want to thank them for allowing me to be an ambassador for that amazing organization. They do some amazing things. They give honor plaques out, and it's just an incredible organization all the way around. So if you don't know anything about them, go check them out. That's tillvalhallaproject.com. Go see that. If there's any way you can support them, please do so. All right. I got Eric Rosenberg. Is that right?
That's correct.
Look at there. I actually got something right this time. So Eric, how you been doing?
Been doing great.
Awesome. Yeah, and we met here on Fort Story, in Virginia. And as I was driving by after dumping my poo, I saw a Coast Guard placard on your RV, and immediately had to stop because I saw you outside. I've not had a Coast Guardsman on at all, and I'm very excited for this.
All right, great.
So this is my first one. The only thing after this that I'll need somebody from the Space Force.
Okay.
But you know,
I don't know anybody from the Space Force.
Neither do I. They're fairly new, so
Yeah.
we'll figure it out eventually. So let's kind of start at the beginning for you. Like, where did you grow up, and then kind of what drew you into the Coast Guard?
Okay. I grew up in Bowie, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., about 20 minutes from Annapolis, and went to college in the Baltimore area at Western Maryland College. It's now called McDaniel College. And got a degree in economics. And after I graduated, I was working for the Department of Transportation Federal Credit Union.
Okay.
And I was in a management training program. After a short time, I was pretty sure I didn't want to spend my adult life working in a credit union.
Yeah.
Not that there was anything wrong with it, but it just didn't excite me at all.
Right. Yeah.
And at that time, the Coast Guard was under the Department of Transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And where I was working was actually in the same place where Coast Guard headquarters was located.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So when I went down to lunch one day, I was looking for a table to sit at, and there were a bunch of young Coast Guard officers sitting at the table. And I went over and started talking to them and found out about the Officer Candidate School program.
Okay.
And I thought, that sounds kind of interesting. I might like that because I've always enjoyed being around the water.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like I was a boater or a sailor or anything, but I enjoyed going fishing and going out on boats with my friends. One of my college roommates was a avid fisherman, and he and I used to cut classes and go down to the go to some river somewhere and go fishing.
There's nothing wrong
on his
with that.
boat. On his boat, hey, you need to decompress every once
That's
in a
right.
while.
It's important.
Yeah, and if you bring some beer with you, that's okay too.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's a fishing trip unless you have beer.
That's true. That's true. At least then, for sure, when I was in college, that was the case.
Yeah.
But so I found out that there was an officer candidate school program, and I kind of talked it over with my parents to see what they thought, and they thought, well, give it a shot, see what you think. So I applied for the officer candidate school program and was accepted and went to OCS at that time it was in Yorktown, Virginia. It's
Oh wow!
Since moved up to where the Coast Guard Academy is located
Oh, I
in
see.
New London, Connecticut. Anyhow, I was in Yorktown, and so that's where my Coast Guard career started. My first assignment after Officer Candidate School was at Coast Guard headquarters,
Oh, wow.
and
So you went right back to where you were before.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it was really kind of cool because I mean I was fairly young, 22, 23 years old, and instead of having to acclimate to some new place in the country and not have any friends or
Yeah.
anything like that, instead I actually went and lived at my parents' house,
Mm-hmm.
and I was right back there with guys I'd got to high school with
Mm-hmm.
and college because my
Right.
college wasn't too far away. Plus, a number of my officer candidate school classmates were also stationed at headquarters.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And but but I didn't want to go to headquarters. I
Mhm.
wanted to go to sea duty.
Yeah.
I wanted to get out on a Coast Guard cutter somewhere.
Yeah.
And I talked to the detailers, and they told me, you do like a year and a half here at headquarters, and we will look at putting you on a cutter somewhere.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And so I did my 18 months working in the finance office at headquarters, and then
Now, did you
yeah.
pick that as a job, finance, or was that?
No, it was assigned to me.
It was okay.
Yeah,
So they probably looked at your college records and stuff.
I had an economics degree from
Yeah.
college, and they slotted me right into the finance field, and it was okay. It was
Yeah.
cool. I was an ensign, and I was learning more about the Coast Guard and how the Coast Guard worked and
Right.
headquarters and all that. And it was also kind of interesting because uh, I got used to working with senior officers.
Right. Yeah.
You know, a lot of times people go out in the field and they're not really exposed to some of the higher ranked
Mhm.
officers and see how the inner workings are,
Right.
how programs work and things like that, planning. And so it was good in that aspect. It gave me a good background and it made me comfortable around uh, enlisted people, officers of my rank, and senior officers too,
Right.
all the way up to admiral. So that was kind of cool. Plus, like I said, I was living at home, so the pressure was off from a
Mm.
social
Right.
aspect. Off of work, what to do, where to go.
Mm.
I grew up there, so I knew the area, had friends, and so that was nice. But so after I did my 18 months at headquarters, I talked to the detailer, and he said, "Well, I got a couple of choices for you. I have a cutter that's open in Alaska."
Oh, wow.
And Alaska had always been a dream location for me. I always wanted to go to Alaska just
Right.
based on things I'd seen in National Geographic and things
Mhm.
like that. So I grabbed that, and I was stationed on a 210-foot cutter, the Coast Guard cutter Confidence, out of Kodiak, Alaska,
Okay.
and went up to Kodiak, and uh, the cutter was mainly tasked with patrolling fisheries,
Oh, I
doing
see.
fisheries enforcement in the Gulf of Alaska,
Yeah.
North Pacific, and in the Bering Sea. And at that time, the U.S. fishing fleet wasn't as well developed as it is now.
Mhm.
And out in the 200 miles offshore, 100 to 200 miles offshore, most of the fishing vessels were foreign fishing vessels, like from South Korea, Japan, Poland,
No kidding.
and the Russians had a large presence there, although they were kicked out in 1980
Mm.
by the U.S. They were no longer allowed to fish in U.S. waters. So the U.S. economic zone extends out to 200 miles, and we
Okay.
were sent out to enforce the fisheries. These countries were given allocation of what type of fish and how much fish they could catch
Right.
over a certain period, and somebody had to monitor them
Mhm.
because they didn't come to the U.S. and offload their fish. They went back to their home country and
Right.
offloaded
Yeah.
their fish. So we went out and we'd go aboard these large factory vessels, these foreign fishing vessels, and send over a small boat and climb a ladder up onto the deck
Oh, wow.
of these fishing boats. And when I say boats, they were ships. They were factory ships. They
Yeah.
did everything from catching the fish to processing them, freezing them,
Really?
packaging
Wow.
them, labeling them, and all that. And they'd be out at sea for months, filling
Holy
up
cow.
their holds
Yeah.
with fish. So, in most cases, there were prohibited species. They weren't
Right.
allowed to keep, like salmon. They weren't allowed to catch salmon, and mainly they were allowed to catch pollock and other fish that are good sources of food, but not the premium
Right.
fish like cod
Mhm.
or like I said, salmon or halibut. And so we'd send a crew over as the boarding officer. I would go up to the bridge and look at the fishing logs
Okay.
and look at what they said they were catching. And then, meanwhile, my team members, mostly enlisted guys, would be down in the hold doing the thankless job of being in these freezer holds and opening boxes of fish, looking at the fish and they try to identify the fish, even though they've
Right.
been filleted or headed and gutted and put in the box. And they'd weigh the boxes and then count the number of boxes
Oh, wow.
estimated in a hold, and then come up to the bridge and tell me, well, we think they have, or we estimate they have so many metric tons of pollock, for instance,
Yeah.
and I'd compare that to the logs and say, yeah, that looked right. But in a couple of cases, they'd come up and they'd say, well, we're finding cod, a lot of cod,
Mhm.
and they had a very small allocation for cod, and we'd end up seizing these vessels.
Oh, wow.
The State Department would get involved, National Marine Fisheries Service would get involved, Coast Guard headquarters, and we'd seize these vessels and take them back to port and
Back in Alaska.
back in
Yeah.
Alaska. The National Marine and turn them over to the National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Marshals, and they'd go aboard the ship and really give it a more
Right.
thorough check to validate our findings,
Mhm.
and they always did validate.
How did your men that were counting and looking at the fish, like if they're filleted and everything, I'm assuming there was some sort of training that they had to take to say,
Yeah,
hey, this is what a certain
yeah,
type of fish fillet looks like or whatever.
yes, they did.
Wow.
They had to do that. But in a lot of cases, the fish were just headed and gutted, so you
Okay.
could still see the body of the fish.
Right. Yeah.
This was 40 years ago, so I'm trying to remember all this stuff.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so that's mainly what we did. Of course, we were also out there to do search and rescue if a ship had issues or somebody
Right.
got sick or an accident aboard a ship, or in a couple of cases, we were called because a U.S. fishing vessel was sinking,
Oh, wow.
taking on water,
Mhm.
or had a fire on board, or some crew member was injured, and so we go over and help them out, or do what we could to
Right.
help them, or in some cases, a plane would go missing,
Mm.
and so we'd search the waters for the plane or coordinate the search.
Right.
But my big memories of being in Alaska on the cutter Confidence was the fishery patrols going on
Yeah.
these big factory ships and seeing what was there.
And then what was your title specifically? What?
Well, I was an ensign at the
Hmm.
time, and then became a lieutenant JG. But I was the boarding officer
Okay.
on board the ship. I was communications officer
Oh, okay.
and like the assistant operations officer.
Oh, wow.
So
And how many officers were on your ship?
I'm
So
trying to
about four or
remember.
five?
No, I think there were about 12
Oh, really?
officers,
Wow.
and if I remember correctly, about 63 enlisted people. We had a crew about
Wow.
75 on board on the
Okay.
210-foot cutter.
Yeah.
The cutter was capable of having a helicopter. We had a helicopter deck, so
Oh,
we
I
could
see.
take the
Yeah.
helicopter with us. Although we only did that a couple times because of the weather conditions out there
Hmm.
in Alaska. frequently, and especially with the 210, it was not a real stable ship, and so a lot of times it would be the weather wouldn't allow us to launch or recover the helicopter.
Yeah.
It had to be pretty calm conditions.
A lot of pitching and stuff. If
Right.
that's happening, there's no
Right.
way that they're going to take off from
Right. Yeah, and you didn't want to launch the helo and not be able to recover it.
Yeah, that could turn out bad.
for the pilots and
Yeah.
the crew on there, definitely. But but the other great thing, of course, about being stationed in Alaska was just taking advantage of the fishing and hiking and hunting and seeing the incredible scenery there. That was really special. So I finished that tour just under 2 years, and I did well enough to be selected to be the captain of a patrol boat, a 95-foot patrol boat, which was in Ketchikan, Alaska.
Oh, nice.
And that's where all the cruise ships go in nowadays.
Yeah.
Back then, it was pretty rare to get a cruise ship into Ketchikan. But we tied up right in downtown Ketchikan, and we were doing patrols. I had a crew of, I think it was 12 of us. I was the only officer on board.
And you were lieutenant?
I was a Lieutenant JG at that time. Yeah, and that was kind of a cool thing about the Coast Guard is that they really put a lot of responsibility on you when you're young, when you're junior in your career. You know, to be the captain of a patrol boat when you're a Lieutenant JG with three or 4 years of service in, that's a pretty big responsibility.
Absolutely.
And they do the same thing with the enlisted people too.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times you'll have a chief who's running a boat of the same size or an 82-footer. They have senior chiefs or master chiefs who are COs of stations, boat stations. So a lot of responsibility put on you at a young age.
Yeah.
And it's just great training and really gives you some great life experience.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, and not all the services are like that.
Right.
You know, that each one of them have their own little unique thing about them. But that's great that they put so much on the young guys.
Right.
So, and that helps in future development as well. You know, as you move up in ranks or whatever, it gives you more of an appreciation, right? And you learn more.
Right.
You know, I don't know. I learn from mistakes. So
yeah, well, we all hopefully learn from mistakes.
Oh, yeah, true.
Hopefully, if you're successful, you've learned from your mistake.
Right.
So that you don't make them again. But really enjoyed that tour. That was just a super tour. A 95-foot patrol boat.
What types of things were you doing?
So we did a lot of fisheries enforcement because Ketchikan is right at the border of Canada and the U.S. And one of the sensitive issues was the Canadian fishing boats would try to sneak into the U.S. Waters to catch salmon because there was a large salmon run coming into Southeast Alaska. And so they'd be out there either long lining or fishing with nets right at the border, and they'd get as close as they could to the line without going over to stay legal. But in some cases, they would go over, and so we would just kind of cruise back and forth on that line, and we'd leave for a little while and maybe come back at night, hoping to catch somebody over the line, and just be a presence there.
Right.
But we also patrolled around just to be a resource for search and rescue and for other law enforcement, be able to react. And always 24/7, there's Coast Guard vessels, you know, off the coast or aircraft patrolling off the coast to enforce U.S. laws.
Right.
And also provide that search and rescue, which the Coast Guard is most famous for, is search and rescue, in addition to their law enforcement, interdicting drugs. And things like that.
And there's a huge presence with the Coast Guard and that aspect, right? The working with law enforcement and those types of things. I mean, that seems to be even bigger than the search and rescue.
Yes. Well, I think especially since 9/11, the Coast Guard has gotten even more active in maritime security,
Right.
law enforcement, the war on drugs, trying to keep illegal immigrants from coming in. That's
Right.
always been the mission, but maybe it's been stepped up even more. I retired in 2001, just before 9/11.
Oh, wow.
So I wasn't there for that transition. I didn't see it. But actually, Coast Guard officers have more law enforcement authority than just about, and I believe it's true, any other federal law enforcement officer.
No
Because,
kidding.
yeah, because you're enforcing customs laws. You're when it comes to illegal immigrants or
Right.
illegal import of drugs and other items, and then if a crime is committed on the high seas, hijacking, things like that,
Right.
they have jurisdiction in all federal waters
Wow.
for any federal law.
Holy cow.
So it's a pretty big responsibility.
That's a big learning curve. I
Yeah.
mean, to know, you have different agencies that are literally set aside for like drugs or, different things.
Right.
So now as a Coast Guard's officer, you're really having to
Right.
hone in on everything.
Yes, and when you go aboard a boat to do even just a safety inspection, because that's another mission of the Coast Guard is
Right.
Safety, to make sure that the boat or ship has the proper life-saving equipment on board and firefighting equipment, and that the captain is properly licensed
Right.
and all that. You're checking everybody's IDs to make sure they're legally in the country, that there's
Right.
no warrants been issued for anybody. You're going through the boat or ship to see what they've actually been doing. What they say they've been doing may not be what they're actually doing.
Right. Yeah.
Which, they could be fishing in an illegal zone or catching species during a season when they shouldn't be, transporting illicit cargo. And you're looking for weapons, it's almost like a traffic stop at
Yeah.
sea
Yeah.
is what you're doing. And you never know what you're going to encounter. I can't say that in my experience, I never encountered anything like that, but there's probably, and that's generally the case.
Yeah.
Most people are law abiding citizens.
Very true.
And,
Yeah.
and they're out there trying to earn a living and doing what they need to do.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, they see it as an imposition that you stop them and that you're keeping them from doing their fishing or going from point A to point
Right.
B or whatever.
Now, did you get any, I guess, any flack from, when you would stop a ship and talk to them and inspect things? Did they give you any flack on that?
Yeah, occasionally they
Yeah.
would. Somebody would say, "Hey, I've got I got a bunch of fish in my hold, and I'm trying to get over to the cannery
Right.
to
Yeah.
offload, and I'm behind schedule or whatever. And now you're going to you're going to stop me and hold me up for half hour, 45 minutes, and
Well, in the big scheme, that's not, especially if it's a bit larger ship and you're inspecting everything, that's not that long.
No, it's not that long. And in most cases, we'd say, well, I tell you what, why don't you get underway, and we'll follow in a boat. We'll follow you as you go
Oh, yeah.
towards the port, and we'll do our thing while you're underway. And in most cases, they'd say, oh, okay, that's fine. And so the captain would call his mate up or something
Yeah.
and say, you take care of the boat, and I'll be with these guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it generally worked out. They didn't like it,
Yeah.
but just like you don't like getting stopped by a cop when
That's
you're
right.
driving down the road,
Very true.
and you get nervous
Uh-huh.
because you don't know what you might even be unintentionally
Well, that's true. Yeah.
breaking the law. You might have a fire extinguisher that expired
Right.
or something. You might have a crewman who you didn't know had a warrant out for his arrest or
Oh
something.
yeah,
You know?
yeah.
So
I
that
can
stuff
see that
happened.
like stuff like that could happen pretty regular, I
Right.
assume.
Yeah, I can. Um, so that's what we did, and so that's what I did on the 95-foot patrol boat. We patrolled Southeast Alaska, the Inside Passage. So the places where people go on these cruise ships now.
Yeah.
That was my off. I was working there for a couple of
That's
years.
a rough
It
office,
was
you know.
rough,
It's
rough
tough,
duty.
and
It
I'm
was
surprised you made it through that, you
it
know.
was tough.
Yeah.
The other thing is I met my wife in Ketchikan,
Oh, okay.
and my next assignment was in Juneau, Alaska, where the Coast Guard's 17th District headquarters is located in
Okay.
Juneau. I was assigned to the um, operations center there to coordinate search and rescue and
Oh,
law
wow.
enforcement
Okay.
things. So I was a watch stander. We'd stand a 12-hour
Mhm.
watch, 12 hours on, 12 hours off, and then we'd kind of rotate through and have a couple days off.
Mhm.
And really nice living in Juneau, Alaska, and
Yeah.
working in an office. We got to see law enforcement, fisheries enforcement, coordinating search and rescue. If there was a pollution incident, like if a tugboat ran aground while it's towing a fuel barge or something
Oh,
like
yeah.
that, that's a major development,
Mhm.
and the Coast Guard's responsible for reacting to that and coordinating the cleanup or the safe recovery of the vessel, doing an investigation and all that.
Oh, wow.
And there's these different offices in the Coast Guard or the different mission
Mhm.
programs that different offices are responsible for. So, for
Right.
instance, there's a law enforcement uh, uh, arm. There's the marine environmental protection arm that looks at
Mhm.
pollution. There's the marine safety aspect, which is licensing of crew members, vessel inspections,
Right.
things
Right.
like that. And then actually, my next assignment after that was on a Coast Guard buoy tender out of Fort Macon, North Carolina. Navigation, the like right
Like the
behind us, these
lighthouses. Yeah.
lighthouses here, that they no longer are operating the lighthouses with a lightkeeper living. Lighthouse keepers used to live
Right.
at the houses. They no longer do that because of technology and
Mhm.
transportation uh, availability now. But now it's done. They're able to monitor it electronically, the lighthouse. But
Right.
I was the XO executive officer on
Right.
the 180-foot buoy tender. I think we had like 48 people on board the tender, maybe 54 people. Can't remember exactly. The CO was a taken care
You
of.
you as an XO, I always like to put it this way: as the XO, you're doing all the dirty work. You're making sure that everything runs and does
Yes,
what it's supposed to do, to
yes,
include the machinery and the men.
right.
Yeah.
It's really the administration, everything from making sure the guys are and women are healthy,
Hmm.
that their medical needs are being taken care of, that their paperwork's getting done
Right.
to make sure that they're not held up in any promotions or
Oh,
anything like
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
Discipline, good order and discipline, cleanliness, uh, you know,
The
making
XO is
sure.
like the catch-all.
Yeah, the XO does a lot of work.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work, but I really enjoyed it, and I had a
Hmm.
great crew and a great supporting cast. Taking care of them was important to me, and
Yeah.
I really uh, had a lot of help doing it. But I really took it to heart. I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that they were treated properly.
Right. Yeah.
And so mainly what we did was we'd go out and we had a schedule. We had to visit each of these buoys off the coast of North Carolina and up the Cape Fear River towards Wilmington, North Carolina.
Right.
And we'd go out and on a regular schedule, pick the buoy up out of the water, clean the buoy off, make sure that the lights were operating properly. Back then, we didn't have LED lights.
Yeah.
And we were just going solar powered batteries.
Oh, wow.
Where we were putting little solar panels on the buoy, so it would keep the battery life longer than original, and a less number of batteries, and paint the buoy and put it back in its proper location is mainly what we did.
When you're talking those buoys, we're not talking about something small that's in port that people see. These are the huge
these
buoys,
are the huge,
probably a crane to pick it up.
Yes, we had a crane on board, would pick up the buoy, and then the buoys are kept in place with this large, like 2-ton sinker made out of cement.
Yeah.
Or concrete, I should say, not cement. A concrete with a long chain on it, because the sinker had to sit on the bottom and keep the buoy, which is floating, from moving off its station. And so there's a large scope of chain on that, and when you pick up the buoy, you get that on deck, but then you have to bring all the chain up to inspect it and make sure that it's in good shape, nothing's corroding through.
So you're literally picking up the 2-ton concrete as well.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Well, in some cases you are, like I forget what the schedule is now, maybe every 2 years the sinker has to be examined and you're checking it. I can't remember, but so that's what we did. In most cases, we had to bring the buoy on board the ship to correct it, but sometimes we'd be told that the light on the buoy was extinguished, that it was no longer emitting its signal, the flashing light on it. So in that case, maybe somebody could run out and boat, climb up on the buoy, go ahead and change out the light bulb. They had these little ratcheting light bulbs. It was like a pinwheel thing, where you have one bulb, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever bulbs, and when one of them would burn out, it would sense it and it would go click, and the next one would go up. Sorry to put up that finger.
That's all right.
And then the next one would go up. So
that's pretty smart, though. I mean, less trips.
Right, less trip, as long as everything was set up properly. But they were almost like these little, tail light bulbs, the old style incandescent tail light bulbs. That's what you were screwing in there.
Okay.
So they might last a while, they might not, depending on how rough a ride that buoy was getting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and you talk about, North Carolina gets some pretty decent storms through there as well.
Some hurricanes offshore. So that was it. That was a good tour. Enjoyed that one. My wife and I had a baby girl while we were stationed there.
Now, you said you met your wife in Alaska. Is she from Alaska?
No, she's from Washington. She's from Tacoma, Washington, and she had gone up there to work. She had a couple of brothers. She comes from a large family. She had a couple of brothers who were loggers.
Oh, yeah.
In Alaska, and her sister was there, and she and her cousin friend decided to go up.
Okay.
And I met her shortly after she got there, and was lucky enough to.
It was the best move she ever did because she met you, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And me finding her and marrying her was the best move I ever made, too. We just celebrated our 40th wedding.
Oh, no kidding. Wow. Congratulations.
Yes, thanks.
That is awesome. Yeah, you don't see that as much nowadays.
Yeah.
I don't know if marriages just don't last as long.
Yeah, I don't know. But we've been happy.
Yeah.
It's been a good life. So we had our daughter when we were in North Carolina, and then I got stationed back to headquarters.
Okay.
And this time, though, I was assigned to the office of the chief of staff of the Coast
Oh,
Guard
wow.
and worked in the budget office.
Okay.
But I wasn't working with budgets. What I was doing was coordinating testimony of Coast Guard officers in front of Congress.
Oh, wow.
So, for instance, if the commandant had to go to Congress and testify
Right.
for the Coast Guard budget, or because of some incident, my office, a couple of us, it was a small office, would talk to the staff of the congressman, find out what they were interested in knowing about specifically.
Right.
Some cases we get the questions ahead of time.
Yeah.
And we'd prepare the answers and kind of brief up the admiral as to what kind of questions were going to be asked, and have his answer book in front of him, and he could open up his loose leaf binder at that time, and see what the Coast Guard's position was going to be on this topic. So
now, and what year was this?
That was in 86 to 88.
Okay. So now, as far as Congress goes, nowadays I watch some of those congressional hearings, and it can get a little hostile.
Yes.
I was wondering if it's the same way at that point in time, Congress.
It was. It wasn't. Things were a lot calmer.
Yeah.
On the political front then. This was, during Carter, Reagan eras.
Right.
And then Clinton came in, and I think the Senate and the House kind of worked. There was a lot.
You mean they actually worked together?
They worked together. They did. They worked together. And I mean, they still had their differences, but they worked together, and there was none of this fiery stuff like you see happening now. So I was doing that for a couple of years. And one of the big events that happened then was the Exxon Valdez running aground in Alaska with the huge oil spill.
Yeah.
And that was a big event for the Coast Guard because the ship was being monitored by our vessel traffic station or service, which monitors the ship.
You monitored the Coast Guard monitored it as they go in and out.
Yeah.
Are they telling them that, hey, you're getting too close to shore, or it looks like you're going to run aground?
Yeah. They'll make sure that the ship is staying in the channel,
right,
and that there's no other opposing traffic or another ship coming out, that they know that the other one's there, and they stay clear and coordinate their passing.
Right.
And things like that. Yes. But they also make sure they're staying in the channel. And in this case, he wandered out of the channel, and I don't know that the Coast Guard was liable for that, or I don't remember what the Coast Guard was advising him that he was leaving the channel.
Yeah.
And what happened there, but yeah. So that was. Up to 2 a day congressional hearings. So I was a real busy guy, and it was a big time for the Coast Guard. There was a lot of scrambling around. I think that the Coast Guard came under a lot of scrutiny at that time for making sure, why did this tanker go out of the channel?
Right. Yeah.
And it turns out that the captain was not on the bridge at the time, and he had been drinking and things like that. So so it was a big deal. And as a result of that, it seemed like the Coast Guard really took a hard swing into the marine safety aspect. It was like a big focus was put on it. So a lot of resources and assets were put into that program and taken from other programs. They did some law enforcement programs and
Oh, wow. Yeah.
other things. And there was a lot of so there was a big focus on that. Um, just a lot. I spent a lot of hours working on it, not doing grunt work,
Yeah.
just sitting in an office.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was an interesting time seeing how Congress worked, how the Coast Guard worked with Congress, and coordinating that. And again, I got a pretty good insight into the Coast Guard program and how everybody worked together to solve problems.
You know, that's something very interesting about your career is starting it out. You got to see a overview of how everything worked working at headquarters.
Yeah.
And then you got to go, okay, now I get to apply some of that in different places, and then you're back, and not only just at the Coast Guard level, but you're talking congressional level.
Right.
You get to see all the ins and outs of what's
Yeah.
happening. I mean, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. A lot of people, Coast Guard officers, never do a tour at headquarters, and they're glad that they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's happy happy to go to headquarters necessarily, but it's important work and it's interesting work, I think, and it really insight into how things work.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I imagine that would pay dividends later in your career as you're moving up, and because you're able to look at things from a different perspective.
Right, and look at how things interact, and not that everything is in a stovepipe. That everything kind of comes together at some point. Hopefully,
it makes sense.
Right, and so from there, I was selected to go to graduate school.
Okay.
And Coast Guard sent me to the University of Maryland, and I got my MBA in Maryland. So that was nice. I took a year and a half.
Was that for business stuff? Or?
Business. My focuses were finance and logistics.
Oh, okay.
At school. So I spent a year and a half at school at University of Maryland. No Coast Guard, no reporting to the office, putting on the uniform or anything like that.
So for all intents and purposes, you were on your own.
Right. I was a college student. Yeah. I was on my own, but I had a wife. A daughter.
That's right.
And our son was born while we were in that area too.
Okay.
But it was also cool because, as I said at the beginning, I'm from the DC area, so we were back home for me.
Yeah.
Not for my wife, but home for me, and so. We had my parents to help support us with, taking care of the kids, babysitting.
Right. Yeah.
I had my friends from growing up or going to school. So it was kind of nice for me to be back home. My wife was on the opposite coast from where she grew up, but she did a great job of supporting me. And we were just talking recently, actually, that she thought that of all the time at the time I was at graduate school was the toughest for her.
Really?
Yeah, because number one, she had 2 young kids to take care of.
Oh yeah, that alone could do it.
That alone could do it. But the other part was that I was home every night, and I was home on the weekend. But I was concentrating on my grad school course.
Right.
And the Coast Guard didn't send me there to get C's. That would be unacceptable. So I had to maintain a good average.
Right.
And it was a tough program. And normally, we were required to finish it in 18 months instead of what would normally be a 2-year program.
Wow. Yeah.
So, we took summer school, we took a heavy load. There was another Coast Guard officer who was going through the same program at Maryland as I was. So he and I became friends. And we worked together studying and things like that. But there was a lot of project work for grad school, a lot of team stuff. It was more than I thought, more than I thought it would be, was working with other students to do projects or do a case analysis or something like that. And
and I could see that, with your wife, and it's like you're home,
but you're
but
not.
you're not
You're
home.
not. Yeah.
And that's probably harder than I'm on a deployment or I'm out on
Yes.
the ship or whatever,
Right.
because you're not there. You're
Because
you're
I'm
gone.
not there, and she
Mhm.
knows I'm not,
Mhm.
and it's not the kids saying, "Daddy, Daddy," and
Yeah.
I'm saying, "Sorry, I have to
Yeah.
close the door because I'm
That's right.
working on something or I'm studying for a test."
Right.
So that was. She says that was the toughest part of the 20 years
Yeah,
that
I can see that for sure.
we were married while I was in the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
So
And being a spouse to anybody in the military, that is not an easy task.
right. Right.
That's for sure.
And I'm not going to compare it to somebody who's in combat. I'm not going to say that it's that she had it rougher than
Yeah,
some
yeah.
spouse of a Marine who's serving in a combat zone or
Yeah,
something like
but it
that.
doesn't matter. It's still a tough job.
It's still a tough job.
It's hard.
It is.
Even if in garrison, I don't know
Right.
how many times. Like for me, I get phone calls day, night, whatever, and it's not like I can just ignore it.
Right.
I've got to do something. We may be on it, and then all of a sudden,
Right.
somebody got arrested. You got to go take care of this.
Yeah.
Like, oh, man.
Yeah.
So, having to deal with stuff like that's no fun.
Yeah. But she did a great job there, and I made it through grad school without any scars,
Nice.
either from school or from her. And I went right back to headquarters after that, and I went right back to the chief of staff's office in the budget. But
Okay.
but in this time, I was actually working in the same exact office room at headquarters, but this time I was working on the budget, and I was
Okay.
helping to manage the Coast Guard budget, putting together, the budget request and allocating funds, and again coordinating between different Coast Guard programs, which a lot of people.
So you're the overall arching budget for the Coast Guard.
The overall budget for the Coast Guard, the operating budget, making sure that if there was a shortfall somewhere, or there was a hurricane, for instance, that required a huge Coast Guard response, that there was funds available to purchase fuel to put the troops into lodging or whatever. I wasn't writing the checks, but I was up at the top making sure funds were available, and coordinating that aspect of it. So, a lot of people wouldn't find it thrilling. I wouldn't say it was thrilling, but again, it was interesting.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the challenge, and I enjoyed the work.
Yeah.
So it was cool. Again, worked with some great people, and a lot of people who ended up being admirals in the Coast Guard, and the commandant of the Coast Guard, the vice commandant of the Coast Guard.
No kidding.
That's when these guys were 06s. They were captains at the time, but later became, commandant and vice commandant of the Coast Guard.
And what rank were you at this point?
Oh yeah, so I was a lieutenant when I was on the buoy tender.
Yeah.
And then when I went to headquarters, while I was at grad school, I was promoted to lieutenant.
Okay.
And all through grad school, and then that tour again, budget at headquarters. My next tour was back to sea duty, and this time I was on a 210-foot cutter, same size cutter I was on for my first sea duty tour. I went as XO of the Coast Guard cutter Active in Port Angeles, Washington.
Oh, okay.
So we got my wife back
to
Washington,
got it,
close to her family, which she enjoyed. Yeah. And that was really a great tour. Loved every minute of that. We had a super crew on board, and we did when I reported aboard, the cutter was actually in Alaska, doing patrols in Alaska. And at that time, we were no longer going on these foreign fishing vessels, because by then the U.S. Fishing fleet had developed, and now the U.S. had commercial vessels that were doing the fishing and doing the factory side type of processing and everything. And there were no foreign vessels fishing in the zone. So even during that relatively short period of time during my Coast Guard career, we saw the foreign vessels moved out and the U.S. vessels were doing fishing. So
well, that is good that it it started booming like that.
Right.
Now, as far as the U.S. vessels, they're out there fishing. Now, did you guys stop them out at sea, or did you just wait for them to come into port and look at what they?
Oh, we stopped them at sea. We didn't, things really had developed so much in those years with the technology. Even though this was back in the late mid '90s, I guess early to mid '90s. I think, I went to the active in '94.
Okay.
By then, there were better communications, better data compilation to know when a vessel had last been boarded.
Right.
To track the vessel, to know who the crew members were.
So it went more digital or electronic.
Yeah. Right. So there was more information available to us when we were out there on the sea. We could see a vessel. In some cases, they had to report their position, if I remember correctly, and so we'd know where the vessels were, and how recently they had been boarded by another Coast Guard ship. So it wasn't as much guesswork involved. There was better coordination.
Well, that definitely makes it way easier, across the board.
Yeah. And
probably way more accurate as well.
Right. And in this case, there were no allocations to the, like the foreign vessels. They were told you can only catch this number and this species of fish. It was totally different. These, the U.S. vessels were fishing, and there was not any allocation like that. I mean, there are still limits. If you watch like The Deadliest Catch, for instance, they'll say, "Oh, we're allowed so many tons of crab or something." They still have those allocations, but there wasn't the Coast Guard who was monitoring them.
Got it. Okay.
So we were out there mainly as a search and rescue platform.
Okay.
But also, if we came across a vessel, we could board it and see if they were transporting illegal immigrants or something like that, or drugs. And but it was mostly just a presence to be out there for law enforcement and for search and rescue.
Right.
And so I was on the active from '94 to '96.
Okay.
Again as the XO, and I was still a lieutenant commander, but I was promoted to commander right at the end of that tour.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Yeah. Right at the end of that tour. And we went to Kodiak, Alaska.
Oh, back to Alaska. Okay.
Back to Alaska, back to Kodiak.
Well, if you don't mind, I want to rewind just for a minute. Okay. I got some questions.
Sure.
So through the Gulf War, Desert Storm, when that all went down, what did the Coast Guard do at that point? Okay, so a lot of the Coast Guard missions stayed the same, but we did deploy troops. Some of my friends were deployed onto Navy ships. Some of the bases in the Gulf War region to support defense operations there. So I have a friend who was stationed aboard a Navy ship. He was leading boardings of these vessels that the U.S. wanted to inspect to see whether they were carrying arms or what they were transporting. So, and the U.S. has cutters over there in the Mediterranean now sailing with Navy ships. Okay. I wasn't involved in that, so I don't have any firsthand knowledge of it. But the Coast Guard's always been engaged in all the defense operations. And in time of war, the Coast Guard actually goes under the Navy. Becomes a component of the Navy. One thing I left out is, when I first went in, the Coast Guard was under the Department of Transportation. And they were for my entire career.
as I said, I got out just before 9/11.
Right.
And after 9/11, the Homeland Security Department was created, and the Coast Guard went under Homeland Security at that time. So the Coast Guard's now under Homeland Security.
Right. That's really cool. You got a flyover specific for you?
Just for me?
Yeah, I called that in. So we got what, three helicopters going by over here.
Yeah. None of them have the racing stripe on them. For the
Well, I can't win them all.
Yeah. You pulled some strings, but not that.
I didn't have enough to pull that strings. But that's good to just know that they're still out there training. They're still out there getting ready for whatever the next mission may be. So
yeah. So I went back to Kodiak. At that point, I was a commander, and I was the finance guy, the comptroller for the base.
Oh, okay.
In Kodiak, yeah. And the base in Kodiak is the largest base for the Coast Guard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the main base in Alaska, and the ships and aircraft that are stationed there cover all of Alaska. I mean, there are a couple of other smaller bases in Alaska, but the Kodiak Air Station, I forget how many C-130s and helos they have there. Can't remember.
Well, that's where the majority of the rescue, like the helicopters and the C-130s go out. Is the majority of that's for rescue stuff, correct?
Right. Yeah. Yes, but also for law enforcement. They're also doing patrols for law enforcement. But yes, mainly search and rescue, and there are 4 cutters stationed at the base there. Also,
oh, wow.
2 of them are buoy tenders that take care of the buoys in the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea and out the Alaska Peninsula. And then there's 2 cutters there that do the patrols for search and rescue and law enforcement, like I did. So I spent a couple of years there as the comptroller and coordinating finance and budget stuff, procurement for the base, and then when that tour was completed, I fleeted up to the XO
be
the XO at the base.
Very nice.
And I was getting ready to make 06 when they captained, and they were talking about. I was talking to the detailers, and it looked like I was going to get VCO of a 210 cutter, but I decided to put in my retirement paper.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I had 22 years in at that point.
Yeah.
It was a tough decision to make. Sometimes I wish I had stayed in, but you make those decisions, and it's tough to pull the plug.
Yeah, very much.
And I really loved the Coast Guard, but I decided to pull the plug mainly because my kids were approaching high school age, and I knew that I was going to have at least 2 transfers if I stayed in.
And that's tough for high school age. Yeah.
Which meant they'd be moving at least twice. Either that or we'd be separated, and I'd be a geographic bachelor, as we called it. And my father passed away, and my mother was 80 years old, and I knew she was going to need some support and help. So I just decided, 22 years, that's a good career.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I pulled the plug.
Okay.
And
so you were at that time, you were the XO at the base.
Contracting stuff. He and I went into business together, arranging golf trips, golf vacations for golfers in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Ah, very nice.
So we moved to Myrtle Beach. My brother sold his business and moved to Myrtle Beach area.
Uh-huh.
And for the next 20 years, we arranged golf trips for people.
Are you kidding me?
No, no.
Wow.
Yeah. So we brought a lot of people. Myrtle Beach is a big golf.
It's huge.
Yeah. There's like, at one time there was over 100 golf courses in the area there.
Holy cow.
And
well, that's
so,
some of the best ones in the world are
Yeah.
down there, correct?
well, some of the best in the country anyhow.
Okay, well,
Yeah. No,
maybe not
in
the world. But okay, well,
I'd have, but there's good ones. There's
yeah.
good, and they're affordable. And we would put together golf packages, basically lodging and golf for people, and brought them in to the Myrtle Beach area. And then we started, when we expanded the business over the next 20 years, we started sending people to Pebble Beach and
Oh, wow.
Kiowa, Scotland, Ireland.
Holy cow.
Yeah, all over, Florida,
Yeah.
all over the U.S. And so I worked with my brother for 22 years, and we got along well. We didn't kill each other. We didn't have any fist fights.
Well, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it was nice. And that's where we still live. We live in the Myrtle Beach area.
No kidding.
And then we have our RV, and my wife and I travel around.
Yeah.
Our daughter lives in Washington State,
Okay.
and our son lives in Florida. So they're as far away from each other as they
Yeah.
could possibly be, which in some cases is good.
Yeah,
Because,
well, that is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need the distance.
That's
Yeah.
right. But so we're enjoying life, and I did 22 years in the Coast Guard and 21 years as a small business owner,
Yeah.
and now I'm retired.
Which, and that's incredible. I interviewed a gentleman, and he has Veterans to Business, I think is what it is. And it's a program or a business he put together. I think it's a nonprofit, but he takes businesses that maybe people have that their kids don't want to take over or something, but they want to get rid of it, So he finds a veteran and matches a veteran with that business, and then they kind of marry up.
Yeah.
And as in my discussions with him, he is talking about how veterans are incredibly successful at starting their own business and being their own, their own boss, if you will. And so you're a perfect example of, hey, you got a business, you started it, you ran with it, and that's another veteran out there doing great things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that my training and my experience in the Coast Guard really helped.
Oh yeah.
Helped me be able to see different aspects of business that other people might not necessarily see. And my brother was my partner, and he had the background also of having been a small business owner himself, and doing IT stuff. So he was able to bring some of that experience in, and we were able to use computer programs to track things and set stuff up. So it just worked well, and it was fun.
Yeah.
It was really,
I would say that's probably the most important part. You got to have fun with it.
I think so. I think you really have to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. I mean, if you're going to do something for 40 or more hours a week, you have to enjoy it, whether you're in the service and you enjoy the teamwork and the camaraderie, or you're in business, or you're working for somebody, and you don't have to be your own businessman.
That's right.
As long as you enjoy it, you'll be motivated to do better and have a better life all around.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. Man, what a great story.
Well, I don't know how interesting it was, but
it was very interesting for me.
Okay, good.
So I'm sure everybody out there is probably going to say the same thing.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope they do.
Well, do you have any words of wisdom for individuals that may be watching, something that you want to impart on them before we kind of wrap this up?
I hadn't thought about that.
I always like to surprise people with it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, number one, I'd say that if you have a kid who's thinking about going into the service, think about the Coast Guard, because it's really a great service. It's small. The missions are interesting. You're almost always located in an area around the beaches, and water. And because it's a small service, you really get to know people. You're not, I guess you're kind of you can be a big fish in a small pond instead of a small fish in a big,
Yeah.
is one thing. I'd also say that when you're getting ready to retire, have a plan as to what you want to do, and start thinking about that well in advance.
Yeah.
Whether you want to go into business, and you may not even know exactly what business you want to go into. If you want to be your own boss, that's great. And if you want to work for somebody else, that's fine too. And, if you want to be a double dipper and go back working for the government, that's a great gig too.
Yeah. Those guys do really well.
Yeah. With
yeah. Their second retirement. Yeah.
Right. I can't really think of too much else.
Okay. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your story. Like I said, first Coast Guardsman. Is that how you say it? Coast Guardsman?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I don't
Coastie.
know. Coastie. That's right. Yeah.
Coastie.
You're my first Coastie. And so that's very exciting for me. And hopefully it goes to show that if there's any other Coasties out there that want to come on the podcast, be sure and hit me up.
Yeah.
So
it was fun.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. Fantastic story, honestly.
Okay. Well, thanks.
So yeah, it was good.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
You rock. Hey, to all the listeners out there, if you're struggling, you need help, anything like that, don't forget that the VA does have some great resources. You can always dial 988, press option 1. You can text 838-255, or you can go to veteranscrisisline.net and click on the chat icon. Any of those options are going to put you in contact with somebody that can help you out. Remember, one veteran life loss is one too many. I care about you. I know he cares about you. The whole veteran community cares about you. So please reach out for help. And if you're out there, you're not struggling, then be sure to reach out to your buddies you serve with and ask them how they're doing. And if they need help, give them that helping hand. All right. One last time. Thank you. I appreciate it. To all the listeners, stay motivated. Change your socks.